I'm Charles Hidayah. I'm the Deputy Clerk for Avon Fire Authority for today. We need to appoint a chair for the committee for this municipal year. Do I have any nominations, please? So, nominated and seconded. Thank you. Are there any other nominations? No? In which case, Councillor Payne, you are the chair and I hand over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you, Shazia, for joining us at short notice for this meeting. Thank you. Right, so we move on to the next item is apologies for absence. And we've had apologies from Councillor Hmic and Councillor Eddy. I think that's all we've... Yep. So then the next item is emergency evacuation procedures. So if I could ask the ACFO to lead on that.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, today we are blessed that the fire alarm test has already been undertaken today, so nothing else is scheduled from a test perspective. Should there be an alarm go off, then we're sport for choice. The front door over there, or there's a door behind me that we'll exit from, and feel free to follow who you wish in that regard. Okay, Chair.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. Public access, I believe there is none. So we move on to Chair's business. Right, well, I have to confirm that this PRSC meeting is taking place as a face-to-face meeting, but due to the continuing prevalence of COVID-19, we are continuing to be sensible and limiting the number of attendees at meetings. For this reason, we are recording the meeting for the public to view, whereas before COVID, committees were not recorded. So I will now ask members to introduce themselves for the benefit of members of the public who are watching the recording online when it is updated. So I'll start. My name is Robert Payne. I'm the councillor for Weston-super-Mare Central, and I've just been elected chair of the committee. If I could go this way.
Hi, I'm Don Davis, the councillor for Peel Ward in North Somerset and the vice chair of the Fire Authority.
Good morning. I'm Paul May. I'm a councillor for Whitchurch and Publow, which is on the outskirts of Bristol, and I'm a Baines councillor.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mandy Peskett. I'm Avon Fire and Rescue Services Collaboration Manager.
I was just going to start with the members first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So if I could go... Yeah.
Good morning, I'm Ben Nutland. I'm the Council for Gate North in South Gloucestershire.
Thank you. Right, now we go to the officers. So if I could go around this way, Steve.
Yeah, good morning, Steve Imrie, one of the Assistant Chiefs for Avon Fire and Rescue.
Good morning, my name is Helen Axel, PA.
Good morning, Pete Davis. I'm the Service Liaison Officer for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services.
Claire Bentley, I'm the Head of Finance for Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
Annabelle Harford, Environmental Manager for Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
Yeah, good morning, Ben Thompson, Temporary Group Manager in Risk Reduction.
And good morning, I'm Simon Flood, I'm the Performance Manager for Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
Good morning, Dave Pike, Temporary Assistant Chief Fire Officer for Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
And Charles Hidayah, clerk for this meeting.
Right, thank you all. Right, if in the event of when we have any votes, I shall take votes by show of hands, votes for, votes against, and abstentions. And could I remind everybody to turn off their microphones after they finish speaking? And okay, that's it. And if we move on then to item 7, which is the minutes of the last meeting, 21st of April. Has anybody got any questions they want to raise on the minutes, or are we happy to accept them as an accurate record? I'll propose that we accept the minutes then. That's seconded Councillor Nutland. All those in favour? Okay, that's everyone. So we move on then to item 8, the performance report. And I'll ask Simon Flood to introduce that one.
Thank you, Councillor. Good morning again, councillors and colleagues. I'm Simon Flood, I'm Performance Manager. In front of you today, we've got the performance report. It's doing two things. It's looking at the performance against the corporate objectives for the first 2 months of the current financial year, and it's also displaying to you the performance reports, our new, or the third year of the new format for the last financial year, showing the progress in a more infographic type format for our performance for last financial year. So what we're asking members to do is to discuss and approve the performance for this current year, and also to discuss and approve the performance report for last financial year. As usual, we've got two main appendices, which is Appendix 1, which is the scorecard, Appendix 2, which is the target tracker wall chart, which is a subset of the information on the scorecard in a more graphic format that we send out to stations and is displayed and is also circulated to member champions. And we've also got Appendix 3, which is the performance report for last financial year. Just quickly with regard to the scorecard, do you remember with the meeting at the end of last year, we introduced the new measures and the format of those measures that we were going to be measuring for this current year. So the scorecard is now displaying the information in that way. So it's got our two strategic priorities, which is creating safer communities and a stronger service. And then underneath all of those, the metrics are organised under our key objectives: prevention, protection, response, resilience, improving our service, and investing in our staff. So that's the way I've structured the performance report, and we'll just touch upon those as we go through. As ever with the information, it uses the red, amber, green method, red showing an indicator that is off target, amber showing something that is near to target, and green showing something that is meeting target. So very straightforward and simple. Okay, so initially looking at the scorecard, on the prevention measures, we have two of our fire indicators that are off target, which is reducing deliberate fires in vehicles and deliberate secondary fires. If I can direct you to the target tracker, on the left-hand side, the bar graphs show those two indicators, and you'll see that for deliberate vehicle fires, we had a particular problem in May where we had a spate of some arson with regard to vehicles, particularly in the Western-super-Mare area. I'm pleased to report that since then the numbers have come down. So again, we're thinking that that is a blip rather than a trend, but it is something we're working towards containing and controlling. And for deliberate secondary fires, we had higher numbers in April, but those again have reduced in May. And since May, the numbers have reduced again. So on both of those indicators, so I think we've had problems at the start of the year, but I don't think there's anything particularly to worry about, and the numbers are coming back under control. There is always, with things like deliberate fires, small fluctuations, and you'll see from the numbers that we actually have in our community are quite low, so the risk level is quite low. But because the numbers are quite low, it is subject to fluctuation in that sort of way. With regard to home fire safety visits, it's something that we know we needed to improve the numbers of, and we measure that on our scorecard, and you can see that currently we, at the first 2 months of the year, we'd had a target to have delivered 833, and we've delivered 732. So we've delivered 88% of the target. But I'm also pleased to report that since then, the numbers for June and for the start of July are steadily going up. So we're reasonably confident that we're going to achieve the end of year target for completing home fire safety visits. With regard to protection, both of our indicators about reducing the number of alarms are going well. So we're reducing the number of malicious alarms and successfully call challenging those ones to make sure that we only attend if there's a reason for us to attend. And we've also been successful in meeting our target of reducing the number of false alarms in business premises that we attend. And basically what we do with that is our control team will liaise with the person who's making the call to us to ascertain whether there actually is risk or whether it is an alarm as opposed to a fire. And if a responsible person at the site is confirming to us and it is an alarm rather than a fire, then we won't attend. But if there is any doubt that it is a fire, then we will attend just to check over. But what we're trying to do is reduce the numbers so our appliances are available for real emergencies. On the response indicators, I'm pleased to report that we're meeting all of those, and we're also meeting our target to answer 999 calls within 7 seconds, and the target is 94% of the time we will achieve that. And after the first 2 months of the year, we've achieved 95.2%, which is good news. Moving on to the resilience section, the main indicators in here are with regard to staff sickness, and you can see that for our corporate staff, so for our non-uniform staff, we're on target, but we're off target for our whole-time uniform staff and our control, and for the two of them added together. And the main reason for that is, following national guidance, we've reintroduced absences due to COVID within those figures, which in the last 2 years we were reporting separately, but the national guidance was to include them this year, but the numbers of people still being off sick with COVID are still quite high, so that's adversely impacting upon the data. And if we take away those figures, we're a lot nearer to the target of what we're achieving. So hopefully as the year goes on and the instances of COVID reduces, we'll see that being more under control. But I reassure members we do have very good information about our sickness, so we're able to do that sort of analysis and understand the causes and the effect. Long-term sickness is still something that impacts a lot upon the levels of sickness we've got, and is still something that we continue to manage as best we can. Okay, and the last bits on there about improving our service, the two indicators about health and safety and environmental are reported quarterly. So the first results of those will be reported at the end of June, so they'll be reported at the next meeting. They weren't ready for the papers produced for this meeting. But the new indicator we have on the scorecard with regard to our revenue budget and variance against the planned, pleased to report that we are on target with the budget, and it is neither above or over what we were anticipating, so it's showing that 0% there. The last one is the investing in our staff. The main indicator here is about completion of staff appraisals, which is described as personal development reviews, PDRs. And our target is to have, for each individual member of staff, to have their PDR completed within 12 months of the last. And our target is to achieve that within 95% of the time. At the end of May, we had slipped down to 86%, which we recognise we need to do better than. But I'm pleased to report that when we ran the data on the 1st of July for the data to the end of June, which again is unfortunately too late to be included in the papers for this meeting, but I'm pleased to report that we're back up to achieving 93%, which is 647 out of our 697 staff having an appraisal that is in date. So we're almost at target, but we recognise that there's still work to do, and we need to keep our focus to make sure we are achieving the 95% that we're going to say we are going to achieve. So that was really all I wanted to say with regard to the current performance. Shall I pause there and invite any questions?
Thank you, Simon. Can I just ask, with regard to the deliberate vehicle fires in Weston-super-Mare, there were a number of cars set on fire in different places, but it was really one incident, but it seems to have been recorded as though it was lots of different incidents. Is that normal? Because it seems to be inflating the figures a little bit.
Yeah, it's very much, if there's more than one ignition source at one site, then we treat it as separate things. But if it's one ignition source that spreads to a number of vehicles, then it's treated as one incident, which in some ways is the problem with recording incidents in this way, in that you can have, so for instance in a building, if we had a small fire over in the corner there that we were easily able to put out, that would count as one fire. But if we had a much bigger fire and we lost the whole building, it still counts as one fire. So similarly with vehicles, it can be slightly confusing in that way. As I say, if there's one ignition source on one site but affects lots of vehicles, that counts as one fire. But if there were lots of different ignition sources on different sites, then that can count as multiple fires. And that's just the nature of the way the Home Office asks us to record the data.
Okay, thank you. Councillor May.
Simon, thank you. Yes, thank you. Can I just ask a couple of questions? The targets, I always like to think about outside of the organisation because as somebody coming into these meetings, if you've got targets, we don't know whether those targets are really stretching or not. Where do you get the targets from?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of where we've been achieving before and what we consider to be an acceptable performance, but we also do benchmark, particularly with the instant information and the sickness information. With regard to the localisation agenda, there used to be national targets for fire and rescue services, particularly under the best value performance indicator regime. That got suspended, so there are no longer any national targets for fire and rescue services. So sometimes the difficulty is that fire and rescue services will decide to measure things in slightly different ways, which is good if that works for them, but it means it's less good because they can no longer benchmark. So where we can, we try and agree that we're all going to do things in the same way. So that's certainly the case with most of the instant indicators and with regard to the sickness indicators. And on the scorecard, on the right-hand columns, I put information about benchmarking on there. Unfortunately, we had the end-of-the-year instant data, which is at the top there, but we didn't at the stage of producing this paper have the end-of-year sickness information, so I wasn't able to include that. But you're quite right, if you don't benchmark, you can look at something and say, okay, well, having X number of something looks good, and it's fewer than last year, but if other organisations that are similar to you have a lot fewer, then it might indicate to you that you ought to be doing something different. So we do make account of the benchmarking.
So do we benchmark with our neighbours, for instance?
It's
because I mean, very different forces really, and it just strikes me that, you know, I'm sat here and I don't know whether all those targets and the benchmarking is good or not.
Yes, it's something that is called family groups. That initially, I think it was the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, when that existed, set them up. So it's putting fire and rescue services into groups of the ones that are most similar to them. Now, you're quite right, every fire and rescue service in some ways is unique. So there is nowhere else that is quite like Avon, and there is nowhere else that is quite like West Midlands or whatever. But it's kind of putting them into groups where it is saying that these are the ones that are most like each other. So certainly on the instant benchmarking, that's what we use. For the sickness benchmarking, it's more of a national thing. So every brigade who chooses to contribute to the data, because it's voluntary rather than statutory, but I think there's only about 5 fire and rescue services who don't contribute, but we can benchmark against each other. And I believe it's work the Home Office are doing about refreshing those, if you like, family groups to try and encourage more benchmarking. So whether that leads to reintroducing national indicators, we will see. But it is something that we take account of when we do set our targets. And we had, through our service leadership team, a number of conversations from the tail end of last calendar year to the start of this calendar year about what we were going to measure and the appropriate target for it. To try and make it that simple thing of smart, achievable, realistic. Because we don't want to set targets that we can't achieve, but they need to be meaningful as in trying to drive improvement.
Thank you. Can I ask another question, Chair, or do you want to? It's about appraisals. Is there a time delay about recording when, because in a fairly large, disparate organisation, you know, getting the information back, and do you pick up any information from the appraisal system about issues that are coming up in terms of the workforce?
Yeah, to answer the second part, the main thing where it feeds into is our annual planning process. So if a number of appraisals indicate that there is lots of development required within certain competencies or whatever, then that's the sort of thing that feeds into our planning process to increase the training upon those. And it also feeds into things like when we're budget setting, how much budget is set aside for particular training events and things. And with regard to the first question, it's an electronic system. We have had some issues with the electronic system because it's in-house built, so the support there, seeing that the people who built it for us no longer work with us. So we have had some issues where we've upgraded other parts of our systems that it's no longer compatible with them. So we do have a number of them that having to be maintained manually. So the reporting of it is not as straightforward as it should be, but it's something we're working towards. But we do have good information, so we know exactly which ones have not been done, and we're trying to focus upon those areas.
Thank you. I asked the question because there's quite a big jump between the figures that you provided and the current figures. So
we used to have a system where all of the appraisals were done at the same time, and that helps in some ways for planning. A few years back, we changed to a cyclical thing. So if my appraisal is done today, it will remain in target for 365 days, and then it has to be done again. But for instance, if Dave's one was done next month, then his target would start when his one is done. So it is easy to, if you lose the focus from it, to a number of them had to be done this month, and if you're thinking, oh, we're on target for it, and then you don't keep ahead of it, you can lose them. But the system does send out automatic reminders to the member of staff and the manager via email, so in some ways there's no excuse for not doing them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Don Davis.
Thanks, Simon. A couple of questions, really, just relatively small, so thank you for the very comprehensive report. I guess, from my point of deliberate primary and all the other deliberate fires, you know, what are the police doing about it? Because this is criminal activity, and to say we've got numbers is because people are taking criminal activity, aren't they? So I guess what level of prosecutions, for example, came about because of those deliberate fires would be a measure perhaps we could have, and we maybe need to liaise more with our police colleagues around what are you doing about it, because as you quite rightly point out, it could put life at risk in certain circumstances. We all know the pressures under home fire safety visits. So what's the trajectory on trying to get to the target level? Because we're quite a long way below, aren't we? And the final one is on the response times. I mean, these are admirable on the first two. The impression I get from the non-emergency attended calls is they're a bit over-eager on those, aren't we? Because we're getting them almost as quickly as the emergency ones. So what I'd like to know is what's the variance on this? Is this being skewed because, for example, city stations can get to incidents much more quickly than, say, a rural on-call for the same type of thing? So, you know, the average might be 8.35, but what's the level of spread? Because I'm not sure that's a desperately helpful figure, really.
Yes, to answer that last one first, it is something we've looked at before. The differences with them is that we attend these sort of incidents at road speed rather than under blue lights. The main thing with them is that we get very few incidents that we attend in this way. So usually if we think we need to attend, we do it under blue lights, and it comes under one of the first two. So the volume of calls that we're counting there is very few. I'd suggest in the sort of the single digits rather than anything more. So I can certainly provide the exact data on that, but you're quite right as well, is that those incidents tend to be in high population density areas where our fire stations are as well. So even though we're going under road speed, we're getting to them quite quickly. It's more, I think, with those, it's a window of 60 minutes to attend rather than trying to get there as quickly as we can, because they are not an emergency. It's something where we're just going to check because, for whatever reason. So we can certainly look at that. In regard to the home fire safety visits, your second question, so it is an upward trajectory, and I know we spoke about this at the last meeting. We are gradually in our partner agencies who provide most of the referrals to us are gradually upping levels of business. So I think at the end of this year we're planning to do 5,000, and then it will progress through there with further years. Higher amounts in subsequent years to get back to where we were with regard to the volume. And then the first question with regard to the prosecutions, it isn't something that at the moment is linked up in that way. Certainly anything that we report as a deliberate fire, we report through to the police. and we get a reference number for them to say that we've reported. I don't think we close the loop in that way to say, from these incidents, always tell us about what the outcome is. It's certainly something that through our meetings with the liaison meetings with the neighbour partnerships and things, it would be the sort of thing that our crews would be taking along to those meetings as issues that are affecting us, and the police are also at those meetings. So I'd have thought the triangulation is coming from those, and the police's attendance at those meetings as well. But it certainly isn't data that I've got to say of the incidents we've recorded as deliberate fires, how many of those have resulted in prosecutions.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, Simon, don't worry about it. If it's in single figures, the non-emergency or technical, I don't need the data. That's not. You've answered my question. I think in terms of the deliberate fires and the impact on prosecution, I think it'd be useful for us as a fire authority to understand what the police are doing about it, because the assumption, I would guess, of our residents, and I talked to Robert equally of that dreadful incident up in South Gloucester, where all the community transport vehicles were deliberately set on fire, amongst other things. I think that our residents expect us to have some feel for what's going on. So could we write to, I don't know, it's the Chief Constable, the PCC, I never really know who does it. They blame each other, don't they, whenever we ask. Perhaps both. And just ask them for analysis of when we report in that it's a deliberate, well, let's say arson, that's the non-technical term I'm going to use, but you'll know the technical fire term. To get some feedback over, say, a 12-month period. If we've alerted them to, X hundred, how many have resulted in prosecution? I think we owe that to the residents of North Somerset, really, because ultimately our guys are going to put themselves in danger, our firefighters, and I think we should be asking if the perpetrators are being held to account.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think it's a perfectly reasonable request, and it's something that we can take forward and explore as to what we can receive.
Yes, in civil letters, Steve, that's what we need to send. Just because for Robert, we're raising our thing, what's the... Tell us.
I certainly know that from the neighbourhood policing teams, so for instance the incidents at Weston-super-Mare, the police contacted us about information about it, which we then provided. So there is certainly joined up work with regard to it, with regard to preventing crime and things, but as I say, I don't have information to say. And there is that thing that at this stage where we record something as deliberate, it will be because we merely suspect it's deliberate, and that can be for all sorts of reasons. When the police come to investigate those, some of them they will look at it and say, well, we don't actually think a crime has been committed, so they won't necessarily crime all of them. But yeah, so it's kind of like the police wouldn't treat all of those as an arson crime, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Paul, could you turn your mic off?
Oh, sorry.
Ben, yeah.
Simon, obviously I'm just picking up what you've just said, but I'm sure you probably agree with me that if it looks like arson, it sounds like arson, it probably is arson. And I think if we're good, as Don said, I think a letter from this committee to either two individuals just to, we've noticed this in the meeting. So, whilst we understand the certain statistics that have been supplied, but at the same time, if there's a trend around arson in this example, do you know what I mean? It just seems like,
Yes, yeah. I would say about that the key thing to it is the numbers are still relatively low. So, it's, which is like I said earlier on, it is not massive numbers of things, but it's enough to show us off target. But it is work that we've done, so I think that would be appropriate for us to do.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Any other questions on that? Okay, let's move on to the other part.
Thank you. And the second part of it is to present and ask for your approval of the performance report from last financial year. This is the third year of doing this in this new format, which includes a lot more infographics. So hopefully gives members of the public a better feel about how we're achieving as a fire and rescue service against our key objectives. There are unfortunately two errors on page 14 of the report with regard to the table that I just want to draw your attention to. Unfortunately, these came about in the production of the report itself. At the top of the table on page 14, you'll see that it says there the 2022-22 report, and obviously that should be the 2021-22 report. And at the bottom, the second to last row of the data, which is about ensuring families and promoting diversity, it's actually, we have got better. We have gone from an inadequate marking to requires improvement marking, so the arrow should be upward rather than downward. So apologies that those weren't noticed in time for the papers, but they have been noticed since, and we've got a version of this where it is corrected, which, if you're happy with the report, that we'll be publishing on the website. So again, apologies about that. The other thing I was just going to briefly touch upon with regard to that is on page 11 under the health and safety. At the last meeting, you may remember members asked about collisions with regard to our vehicles, because we had the measure in there about low speed collisions, and we asked for a little bit more information about those, which hopefully is provided in that section of the report. But we also were asked about whether there had been any high speed incidents with regard to our vehicles, which we weren't currently measuring. And we've checked that with our health and safety manager, who informs that there had been two incidents, one of which was a stone hitting a windscreen of one of our fire officer response vehicles, which caused a little bit of damage on a slipway of a motorway. And the second one was a fire appliance travelling at 35 miles an hour that had a minor collision with a second vehicle. So nothing too untoward, but you just asked about that information, and I'm pleased to supply that. So that's the report. I hope you've had a chance to have a look at it and think that it's doing the right thing, but willing to take any questions with regard to it.
Thank you. And the approval of those two changes, that's correct, yes. Okay. Questions? No? Everyone happy? Paul?
Chair, can I just register? I think that the way you've presented the report is really excellent. It was readable and understandable, which often for reports don't come out that way. So congratulations on that. Can I just flag up at this point? I mentioned it at the last meeting. I got told off because it was on the later part of the report. But the target around focusing on good for the Fire Authority, I would still like us to have a plan or a review of outstanding, of how we get to outstanding. Because I do think we need to be able to lift our eyes up. And I know all the hard work that's gone on to get to the current situation where we want to reach good, but I do think we actually ought to at least think about what outstanding should be for the Fire Authority. Now, I know that's probably in the next item, page 68, but I do think, I still feel that we actually ought to have some ambition looking above good as a Fire Authority. So I'm just flagging that up, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, do we need to approve the report then? So I'll propose that we approve both of the reports. Does that find a seconder? Yeah. Okay, all in favour? That's everybody.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Simon. So we move on to item 9, which is the transformation programme update.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Dave Pike, and I'm representing Transformation today. I'd like the committee to note the report, scrutinise its contents, and any recommendations or suggestions it sees fit. I'd like to bring your attention really to the key considerations, item 5 on the report, and obviously some of the issues that still remain, reference some of the vacancies within the team, which we're now working on, and we've got one now, so we've managed to fill one, and we've got one remaining. And we've also done some considerable work in getting the Firewatch upgrade in progress, which obviously I've mentioned later on in the report. Last meeting it was mentioned about project progress and where we were progressing on different elements within it and whether they were on track or not. And you can see from Appendix 1 that now, as part of the audit and as part of those recommendations, that's now in the report as an item which will go through to the Transformation Board to be highlighted if there's any issues with that. Linking into that, obviously there's some projects that are still on hold, and they are very closely linked into the Firewatch upgrade and where we are with that, which is now in phase. The test database is being developed and finished, and once we've got that, we can start progressing on the upgrade of Firewatch, and that allows some of the other projects to move on. Within the project register, we've also added 2 more tabs. One is for an SLT sponsor and a business lead, which will give us a lot more clarity on who is actually leading on those projects, and so we can actually move those forward and develop them on. And obviously, I've also linked in there about the RSM internal report, and there were 4 actions on there, and I'm pleased to say they are either completed or in progress to be completed. And the only other thing that I'd really like to mention really is we've got a benefits management framework we've put in place now, which will give us a lot more information on delivery of benefits from each of the identified projects. Thank you.
Any questions on the day's report? Yes, Don.
Thanks for the report, very comprehensive. And I must admit, it's much easier to read it on the paper form rather than on the screen, but I think I would have failed at Specsavers if I was trying to read it on the screen. I guess the question is, am I right in thinking this is Firewatch, this thing that's been going on forever, as far as I can remember, about the upgrade on that? And though I appreciate work is going on, how certain are we that the work is actually going to deliver? Because am I right in thinking this is the thing that's been going on for about 10 years now, trying to update it?
I can't give you any information on the past. All I can say is we are at the point now where we've commissioned the IT provider to put the infrastructure in place, get the test database. There is a timeline set up within the report on getting it tested and everything else and getting it live, which will give us the most up-to-date system, the same as a lot of the rest of the country are using, which will allow us to use it in the way it's supposed to be used. So there is a definitive timeline of this actually happening.
And we think that will go through this time?
Yes, so I've been given assurances that the test database will be up and running by the end of this month. And then obviously it's all the test work in the background, which obviously links into Simon's team, making sure that it works as it should work as we move on, and then that will allow us to get everything else in place.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, we just note that report then. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to the HMIC inspection action plan. Pete.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Pete Davis. I'm the Service Liaison Officer for HMIC FRS. And tabled today is the regular report to the committee to present the latest edition of our Round 2 HMIC FRS Inspection Action Plan for Scrutiny, as per the authority delegated to the PRSC by the full Fire Authority. Members will be very familiar with the background to this. Our last full inspection from HMIC FRS, the results were published on the 15th of December last year, and as a result of that, we developed an improvement plan to address the 22 areas for improvement contained within that inspection report. And the last version of the service leadership team approved version of that inspection action plan is provided at Appendix 1. You'll remember that that initial Round 2 Inspection Action Plan was approved for publication by the committee at its meeting on the 21st of April, but the version which is provided to you at Appendix 1 will be familiar to members because it was the same version that was tabled as a one-off to the full Fire Authority meeting on the 22nd of June, and that was in response to the Chair's particular request that, given the importance of the HMIC FRS Inspection Action Plan, that all members, as opposed to just the members on this committee, were given visibility of the approved plan. So, in recognition of the fact of the progress made since our Round 1 report, the frequency at which this Round 2 action plan is tabled to the service leadership team for its scrutiny and approval has been reduced from every month to every other month. And therefore, because of the timelines involved in the preparation for the papers of this meeting, coupled with that increased period between meetings for the SLT, then this particular appendix is the same version that you've seen before. Progress against the 63 individual actions within the plan to address the 22 areas for improvement within our HMI report is provided on page 55 of your overall pack. And whilst progress is ongoing, the figures are fairly static because obviously we are still in the first few months of this brand new Round 2 action plan, so those figures are not unexpected. But at the moment we're standing 17% completed, 40% ongoing, with 41% not yet started. But as I said, we're at the beginning of this brand new action plan, so those figures aren't particularly unexpected. In terms of other HMI CFRS inspection activity, as per sections 5.3 to 5.5 of the report on page 56, the only thing to report to the committee is the submission of a consultation response back to HMI around its proposed inspection programme and framework for Round 3, which will be in 2023-24. And that, in part, is relevant, Councillor, to your comments around what does good look like and our strive for initially good, as indicated in our current service plan, and ultimately, of course, outstanding. And I'll mention that now, as obviously we'll be coming back to it in discussion anyway. The current graded judgments, which HMI CFRS award to fire and rescue services, there are 4 different graded judgments: outstanding, good, requires improvement, and inadequate. Their proposal is to introduce a system of 5 graded judgments, which they've already applied to police inspections. So that will then move, if it's adopted, to outstanding, good, a new category of adequate, requires improvement, and inadequate. So we'll be moving, if these proposals are adopted, from the current 4 level system to a 5 level system. And that, as I say, will match what they are currently doing for police inspections. And in that system, good will be based on policy, practice or performance that meets predefined graded criteria and informed by relevant national operational guidance or standards. And then if a service is judged to be performing well exceeding that, which is expected for good, then there will be a graded as outstanding. So it is linked to compliance with national operational guidance and standards, but currently, in the current 4 graded system, the only thing that we've really got to base the graded judgments on is what HMI publish as their graded judgment criteria on their website. So they say what good looks like, and then if you are well exceeding that, then you get outstanding, or if you're below that, then either requires improvement or inadequate. There is a proposal to change those existing judgment criteria with a new, what the HMI call are characteristics of good performance, and that will be subject to a further consultation before the commencement of round 3 in 2023-24. So in terms of the roadmap to first good and then to outstanding, the only thing we've really got to base it on is the results of our last inspection and the 22 areas for improvement, which the action plan tabled to you today in Appendix 1 is designed to address, and also the existing graded judgment criteria. It may be that once we go to the new system, assuming that it's adopted as a result of the consultation, we'll get more information from these characteristics of good performance. But I'm not really in a position to be able to say any more about that yet because we don't yet know. So I'll pause there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Questions? Go on, Don.
Well, thank you, Pete, for this. I mean, comprehensive as ever and very detailed reading. A couple of, I think, more strategic questions to ask then. The PORIS, which is the Provision of Operational Risk Information System. We're depending quite a lot on that, aren't we? And I can see certainly the benefits to it, but I guess the question is around deliverability of that within the timescales that we need to have, because we are somewhat dependent on others to help us with that. And I guess the other question then from a strategic point of view is, in terms of delivery of the prevention agenda, again, to some extent reliant on recruitment and potential transfers within the service, what's the view in terms of deliverability and the risks around that as well? Because clearly there are level of risk on both of those, and they are two pretty strategic things in relation to, going to where Paul and all of us want to go.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Well, first, taking your point around the PORIS agenda, the provision of risk intelligence, certainly there is a dependency on IT hardware and software, and that is detailed within the action plan. There has been an approved business case for the financial investment in order to procure that new IT system in order to provide operational risk intelligence to our frontline crews and obviously towards firefighter safety. So that is certainly a crucial element, and progress is being made against it, but of course it is dependent on the delivery of that IT infrastructure. And I think perhaps, Ben, you might be able to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Fully agree with what Pete just said, but the only caveat to that is that there's a huge amount of work and progress we can make even whilst we don't have the new software. So we're already spring cleaning our current data set, for want of a better explanation. We've already got lots of plans for the system and process. And yes, the gold standard in the aim game is a new piece of software which fits in with our current CFMIS database and what we already have. But where we're at does not stop us progressing. It's slightly more clunky and a little bit slower the way we currently do things, and that's why we want to be more efficient and effective, and hopefully potentially one or two pieces of software looking at will help with that. But we do have the means to upload risk information to our frontline fire engines at this moment in time, sat here today, and we've certainly got the means to collect data and improve what we've got. So it's not a case of everything rests on the software at all. And for that reason, there's a whole number of work packages within the PORIS team that they're looking at, and the software will take time because of the procurement and because of the market research which we've done. That's now come to an end, really, the market research. I think we've looked at pretty much all the options out there, but slightly disappointingly, but not unsurprisingly, there isn't one off-the-shelf piece of software which does it all for us and ticks all our boxes and nicely fits in and converges with everything we've got. So as always, it's going to be a little bit of a journey and will take some time. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, it does, yeah. And I guess the prevention thing, will you just cover that briefly? I'm just looking more at Steve now. I wonder when we do member briefings, because we do them about once every 3 to 4 months, don't we? Whether an update on not only the software, but also a demonstration to members of what we do with our software. Would it be quite useful to have? I mean, I'm sure that can be done remotely, because I mean, you could actually be next to a piece of equipment and demonstrate. I just think from a context point of view, I think a lot of us would find it quite useful to understand, what it is, because I know it's pretty important when our firefighters are at an incident, what data they get, because I've seen them on some of the appliances. But I think to make sure everybody's up to speed on that, especially newer members, it would be useful to have.
Yeah, we certainly rostered that one into November's member briefing. We've carried over one also around Firewatch, which was your previous concern also. So, yeah.
Chair, I want to thank you for the presentation, because actually it's made it much clearer. What I wanted to do, though, was to ask you whether it's possible to actually see what outstanding looks like, and then have a plan, almost as a feasibility study of how we move from good, because I'm working on the assumption that you are going to be there around good, moving forward into outstanding. And I think as an organisation, we can't sit here too pleased with inadequate. I know all the hard work that's going in, and I fully respect that. But what I'm saying is, I think you've got to lift your head up occasionally to say, where can we go? Now, you've made this change around, the change that's going to take place around 23-24 to the 5 categories. We've seen with several police forces that they've actually been put into special measures, and therefore I think that it's important that perhaps when we have the next inspection that we have got the ability, to say, yes, we're moving towards not adequate but good, but we have also a plan of thinking of how we can become outstanding. And I'm not doing that as being critical of the organisation. I just think for the organisation's point of view, it's good to have an ambition to be outstanding. I don't know whether that's a reasonable request or not, but I do think it would be sensible to look at a feasibility study about moving to the 5 categories of how we would move from good to outstanding in a reasonable period of time. So I appreciate that may not be entirely popular in this room, because that involves doing additional work, but I do think it would be sensible for us to be saying, when the inspector is in, that we are an organisation that's ambitious.
Yeah, Pete, is that something we can do?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I suppose just a couple of points of clarification just to begin with. First of all, obviously moving from round 1 to our current round 2 results, the hard work had resolved all of the inadequate, so we haven't got any of those at the moment. And the current graded system for which we can work on at the moment is still those 4 levels of grading. The proposal to move to 5 will obviously be subject to confirmation from the inspectorate. But I don't think there'll be any disagreement around the room in terms of ambition to get to outstanding. Our current service plan outlines that we want to move first to good, obviously, and then ambition from there on. But we can certainly circulate the current graded judgment criteria, which are the only document that we've currently got from HMI which describes what good looks like. But there will then be this further consultation on characteristics of good performance, and we all wait to see what that looks like. But I think in general, the look forward to first good and then outstanding, I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
Chair, thank you. I think that's perfectly reasonable. When the characteristics of good performance come out, we perhaps can have a report back here. But I think what I'm asking is to go to the Chief Fire Officer and say, can we at that point do a feasibility study? I'm not talking about vast costs, but actually thinking about what it would mean for this fire authority to move to outstanding. And you can't answer that. You know, I can't propose that at this stage, but I would like that conversation to take place with the Chief Fire Officer, because I think it's something that we could then demonstrate that we are moving forward into good, but we also have ambitions of moving forward to outstanding. But I appreciate you've given a perfectly reasonable answer at this stage, but I do think it's something that we should be thinking of as an organisation. And sorry, the other question I had was really quite simple. You said that the SLT are reviewing it every 2 meetings. Are they giving this sufficient priority?
I think the answer is yes, in terms of it is one of the 3 organisational priorities as stated by the Chief Fire Officer when he came into office on his very first day. Delivery of the Hmic FRS Inspection Action Plan sits alongside the delivery of the service plan and acceleration of our organisational cultural journey as one of his 3 stated priority actions. So I think from a strategic level, there's certainly the public buy-in as to the importance of the HMI action plan.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Yes?
Yeah, should I seek advice really from your assistant to your right? Should I make that as a proposal for this meeting, or because I have no idea whether my 2 colleagues agree with what I've said or not. Sorry, 3 colleagues.
Well, you can make a proposal if you wish to.
So, Chair, just to say, so all you're being asked to do today is to note the progress, discuss its contents and make any recommendations. So you can absolutely suggest anything that you want to add to that.
So shall I be a bit more specific? That when the new characteristics of good performance are available, that we actually look at how we move into good, but have a feasibility study about how we move to outstanding.
Should those be the characteristics, of course?
Yes. But I think it's quite clear that the inspectorate are getting tougher, and you know, I'm sitting here. I certainly don't want to be requires improvement, but adequate is not good enough. So I think we should be moving that as a way forward, Chair.
And Chair, I think the addition of the feasibility study actually that makes it reasonable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Does that find a seconder then? Yes, Don. Okay. Any other comments on that before we should go to vote on that? We're all in favour? That's all of us. Okay. Is there any other comments or anybody wants to make on the HMI inspection report? No. Okay. Thank you, Pete. Move on to item 11 then, the capital programme update. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So you've received a report today on the updated version of the 2022 to 23 to 2024-25 capital programme, which has now been adjusted for the final year-end position from 2021-22. So the majority of the information is as per the approved programme. The only adjustment that we've made is one that I highlighted at a previous meeting around some ancillary vehicles, which when we submitted the report previously were expecting in last financial year, but have unfortunately been delayed to this financial year in terms of delivery. So that's that £1,000, which is the difference between the previously approved programme and the updated version that you've received. There are also a number of updates which have come through from our operational leads on capital, and just to sort of give a little insight into what's happened in the first few months of this year, we have had some spend go through, the majority of which has been around the Avon development, which is now almost complete, and the other we're expecting to progress as per the proposed programme. So happy to answer any questions on that.
Questions? Yes, Don?
Claire, for the report. I mean, I guess that we will have at these meetings ongoing reports on the deliverability of the capital programme. I know it's like a stuck record on our capital programme, but year on year we defer more of it to the following year than we actually spend. And I think we as an authority need to be holding the service to account in making sure we're realistic. I mean, I appreciate there are some challenging issues around capital, not least getting builders and people to build, actually make our fire appliances, but welcome an ongoing update of this to this committee. Thank you. Other than that, thank you very much for the report, and I think this is a massive improvement on where we were before.
Thank you very much. And just to kind of clarify as well, in terms of the 2022-23 figures which are within the programme, what we did when we rolled over the programme from 2021-22 was to actually look at sensibly what could be achieved. So these figures are very much based on ongoing information that we have. So what we're expecting is for the same thing, and that's why we haven't got that big number which has been carried over. So.
Paul, yeah.
Chair, thank you. Claire, can I just raise a question around Bath? It's the first time I've heard that issue around the ambulance service, bearing in mind that they appear to be under extreme pressure. Is there anything, a bit more detail about that?
I'm not able to update on that. Right. That is one of our operational issues. I'm happy to take that back to our premises lead and ask him to provide additional information.
Is it? Sorry, it's... I know that
yeah, Claire's from finance, so she can't really answer questions about this project specifically. But I don't know, right. Is there somebody else? Steve, can you?
Yeah, so it's been touched on before, and certainly at last Fire Authority meeting, there was ongoing conversations with chief execs from each partner agency, and as referenced in the paper, SWAS and ambulance are not in the same position as we are, or the police, and that's why we're exploring just a different approach right now.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the capital programme? Okay. All right, thank you. We'll note that report then. Thank you, Claire. And we'll move on to the next item, which is the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Progress Report. Ben. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, colleagues. Ben Thompson, currently Temporary Group Manager for Risk Reduction. So this is the next Grenfell Tower Inquiry Progress Update. The overall status remains unchanged, with 16 of the internal actions complete and a further 13 still being in progress. We've had a further review of our progress and target completion dates, and regrettably 7 internal actions have now had their target completion dates delayed, and I'll move on to section 5 of the report where we discuss the reasons for that. So internal action 10 has been delayed by 1 month until the end of July, whilst the other 6 actions that have moved have been delayed until December 22. The primary reason for these delays relates to the procurement provision of new hardware for the rear of appliances. This device essentially needs to function for several internal departments, not just for the Portis team, and therefore it was very important the correct device was chosen as there are significant costs associated. This decision was approved by the Assistant Chief of Service Delivery at an Instant Command Working Group in April. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying there is we really wanted to engage widely with our internal stakeholders to make sure that we got that decision right, and didn't find ourselves in a situation 6 or 12 months down the road where another department suddenly flagged that that device wouldn't work for them. So we've been careful in that decision making, but the procurement is now underway and that will assist with a number of those actions. In terms of wider progress, the second phase of our improved tall buildings training has now been completed, and this consisted of 41 half-day sessions which were delivered throughout April and May 2022. This was face-to-face training to build on what was started with the e-learning package. And the third phase of training is now also well underway and will continue through July, August and into September. This will consist of 20 coached exercises, and these are taking place in local high-rise authority buildings. We thought it was really important for this piece that we trained in a realistic setting. There are some facilities up and down the country where they've got a sort of series of steel boxes on top of each other, which provide some benefits, but a lot of the challenges around tall buildings relate to logistics of operating in that situation. So hence the decision to use our local high-rise tall building stock rather than a facility somewhere out the country. Really pleased to announce as well that only yesterday, so hot off the press if you like, we've released some more operational information notes. Basically they are our policy or procedure, and yesterday we released a fires in tall buildings, a stairwell protection and a fire survival guidance operational information note. I'm really pleased on a personal level because we've been working on that for probably approaching 2 or 3 years, and it's all now coming together, so it's really good that's happening. On a slightly different area, our work with Bristol City Council around high-rise CAD plans, that stalled slightly when the gentleman that was working on them, Phil O'Connor, took up a new role as the Portishead team manager. He's got a background in structural engineering, but he was our CAD technician for a period of 12 months. But when he took that new role as a manager, he obviously had other priorities as well. But really pleased again to announce that we've now appointed a new full-time CAD technician as of the 13th of June. And Alexandra is now working hard to get up to speed. So that piece of work around CAD plans, not just for high-rise, but for other premises around the county will continue. Just wanted to add a last thing from me really. So we're into phase 3 of the training for our operational crews with the 20 coached exercises. But we're also very aware that once that's been completed, we then need to operationally assure what we've done. This is a whole raft of new equipment, training and policy, and it's important we assure it at the end to see how well it's been received and implemented. And only at that point will we truly know how well it's working in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Ben, where's the Ben?
Too many Bens. Ben, I just want to say thank you because I know how much work you've put into this over the time that I've been on the authority. Just a quick question in terms of the CAD plan. Obviously, there's been a transition there. Has it caused much of a delay getting that information in, or is there a significant delay?
So we had approximately 4 months ago, we had 51 out of the 61, I think, 60 or 61 council high-rise residential buildings completed, and that is still where we're at. So I suppose the honest answer would be it's probably delayed things by about 6 months, the transition of Philip O'Connor into the manager post. But I'd be optimistic now with Alexandra in that role that we can really crack on. And the good thing is that Philip's the team manager for that team, so she's got the best placed person to explain what we're doing, how to do it, and make sure that's efficient going forward. But that is only the tip of the iceberg and obviously relates to the wider Portis work. We're really pleased with the CAD plans for the high-rise. We're seeing them as a gold standard for how our information should look. They're not just plans because there's a lot of annotations and extra information on there as well. So it might be that we choose certain areas of the service risk profile and then prioritise those. Just as an example, some of the buildings down at Portishead have got some specific risks around cladding, etc. So we may choose that they're our next priority. But obviously with 70,000 plus commercial properties in Avon, we can only really focus on the very highest risk.
Any further questions? Yes, Paul?
Just a statement, Chair. I think out of a horrible set of circumstances, this is a really positive report. And in a way, we should have perhaps been doing this before, but it's really great that this work is being done. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, then we'll note that report then. Thank you, Ben. Moving on to item 13, the annual environmental report. Annabelle.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. So I'm pleased to present the annual environmental report for the last financial year, 21-22. Historically, we've presented this report at the September committee meeting, but have now obviously brought this forward, which I think is more appropriate and obviously makes what we're reporting more current as well. So without going through the whole report in detail, I'd just like to draw members' attention to a number of things. So, for example, the key environmental improvements and achievements which have been highlighted in the infographic, which is appended to the main annual environmental report on page 6. So that was produced for inclusion in the annual accounts, and I hope members find that a useful sort of snapshot of some of our key achievements. I just particularly wanted to note that we have in fact slightly exceeded our target to reduce our carbon emissions by 20% this year towards our net zero by 2030 goal from the 2019-20 baseline. Also, as you will be aware, because I've reported to many committee meetings about it, that we've now fully delivered on our public sector decarbonisation grant, which was approximately £824,000, and we've delivered on all those projects on time and in budget, and that was obviously a key focus for the environmental team in 21-22. As a result of that, we've been recognised in a number of ways, and particularly I wanted to note that we were winners of a National Clean Energy Award, and more recently I've also discovered that we were winners of a National Business Green Leaders Award, which is quite significant. So I also wanted to just draw your attention to the fact that we've introduced a new corporate risk around environmental risks, and this really reflects the sort of increasing strategic importance of environmental improvement and protection for the service throughout our estate, our fleet, our operations and all of our activities, so that we deliver on the commitments that have been established through the Fire Authority declarations of climate and ecological emergencies, but also the commitments enshrined in our environmental strategy, particularly the net zero goal, and our commitment to be sort of leaders within the sector on environmental issues. I also just wanted to note that on page 5 of the report, I've included some information about some of the networking and partnerships that we've undertaken over the last year, as this was previously requested at one of the committee meetings by one of the members. So, sort of looking forward, and really to give you a flavour as well of the sort of depth and breadth of the environmental work that we undertake in the service. I see sort of 22-23 really being quite a sort of period of consolidation after a slightly crazy year last year, delivering on the grant. And particularly we're going to be developing an environmental management system which is compliant with the ISO 14001, which really pulls together all strands of our environmental work to make sure that we're delivering on it in an effective way, but also striving to towards continual improvement. We'll also obviously be monitoring the impact of the grant delivered measures. This is also a requirement of the grant that we continue providing monitoring data for the next 3 years. And we'll be evaluating the technologies that we've installed, particularly, for example, the air source heat pumps, the batteries, solar systems, and the opportunities that there might be for further replication across our estate. So the early indications are that the predicted energy and carbon reductions in our buildings are being delivered on, and those are having quite a significant impact on our overall carbon reductions for this year already. Also, I just wanted to note that we've now nearly completed the installation of electric vehicle charge points across our estate, and we now have only 2 sites remaining, which are being undertaken this month. We're also close to a switch on of the district heating supply at our Temple Fire Station, which is actually, the work's been undertaken by Bristol City Council, as that was done with, again, another public sector decarbonisation grant, which Bristol City Council received to roll out the district heating scheme across the Temple area. We will also this year be continuing with the transition of our fleet to, where possible, and where technologies allow to lower emission vehicles or zero emission vehicles. However, as you're all aware, there are significant delays in the global supply chain around sort of delivery of electric vehicles, so that will of course impact it slightly. Then we'll also be progressing our work to transitioning the firefighting foams that we use at incidents to a more biodegradable and more environmentally benign foam product. This issue is really sort of quite a hot potato at the moment, and increasingly amongst fire and rescue services and regulators. We'll also be furthering work to embed environmental protection best practice at operational incidents and operational response in line with the national operational guidance. And related to what Ben was just saying about operational assurance, we'll also be working very closely with the operational assurance team to make sure that we actually ensure that the environmental protection best practice at operations is being fully implemented. And then lastly, I just wanted to also mention that we've been working with colleagues across the service to develop a combined impact assessment digital tool so that all future business decisions, whether projects, proposals, business cases, new partnerships, collaborations, events, etc., will all, it will be mandatory for them to all undertake a series of impact assessments which consider our people, data protection, environment and our communities, and of course ensure legal compliance. So I think on that note, I'll pause and ask if anybody's got any questions.
Thanks, Annabelle. It's more of a technical question, so I'm not sure if anyone wants to jump on this or not, but you mentioned the foam and it was a bit of a hot potato. What's the difference, and does it affect performance compared to what we're currently using?
So in a nutshell, the difference is that we'll be looking to move from away from foams which contain a certain type of a family of chemicals called PFAS. Otherwise, they're sort of known as fluorinated foams, and we're looking to move to fluorine-free foams, effectively. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Is there any change in performance in terms of how it deals with the fire, or is it just simply a change of ingredients?
So that There is a slight change, but that's obviously a key criteria. So our technical services manager has been researching and observing sort of different foam products to make sure that they still meet all of our requirements.
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Chair, can I just congratulate you? I think I'm not often lost for words, but I think this is a really, really effective report. And I think we should be proud of it and the progress being made. So that was my first point I want to make. The other, we heard just now about 1.5 million on 4 vehicles. I'm just wondering, the technology hasn't really kept up with the need for us to reduce carbon on those vehicles, because in Bath in particular, you know, can you go up down hills in large vehicles with electric power? So I just wonder whether you mentioned that you're bringing that into the procurement process, basically. Has that been picked up around those 4 vehicles that were mentioned earlier?
So I guess I was referring more to our ancillary fleet, where we have, LGVs, etc., which are more readily available. So at the moment, we're not yet looking to procure in the sort of current budgets electric fire appliance. They are now available, but really just prototypes. But it's something that our fleet manager could probably speak to more effectively, and he's certainly keeping, as a service, we're keeping abreast of London Fire Brigade's trials of the electric fire appliance at the moment, and also particularly to address your point about their capabilities and performance.
Yes, Don, yeah.
Again, I'll echo Paul's congratulations. I think this is, in fact, we've got these awards, it's just brilliant. And you and your team should really take the accolades for this. I mean, as you say, the delivery of that grant was amazing, considering the time we had to do it. You've answered one of the questions around the foam. So perhaps we could change the report to imply that, because it's a bit conspiracy theory, the way it's written at the moment. In fact, there's other priorities. But actually, that's a perfectly legitimate question, isn't it? Is it how effective is it? And we need to make sure we're very clear on that. So perhaps in terms of the report, we can make sure that's noticed when we next see it. We know what the reason is it's being assessed. I guess the disappointment then is the reducing the use of single-use plastics, which is also a red on the list. And I kind of thought that would be a relatively straightforward thing to do. But again, it says other priorities. Is that because people don't like plastic which isn't single use, or is it because there's something else happening?
So in terms of the single-use plastics, that was sort of deprioritised really because the environmental team up till recently has just been one person, so there's been a limit to what I've been able to achieve. It's certainly not sort of a low priority. And although we haven't been able to carry out that sort of service-wide audit, there has been quite a bit of work that's been done to reduce the use of single-use plastics anyway. For example, drinking water bottles, or sort of enshrined with a number of our sort of procurement tenders. We try and ensure that new products or goods that we're buying in don't contain single-use plastics. So really, I guess what we had hoped to do was a sort of a holistic service-wide approach, but we're certainly taking other steps until such time as we can do that.
So the reality is that both of those which are reds on here aren't really reds, they're more ambers. It's just nuance in the way we're actually delivering them. So perhaps we should make the report clear about the fact we are doing some work on single use already, but it needs to be finished. On foam, we want to change as long as we think it's acceptable from a service delivery point of view.
Yeah, no, I can certainly amend that. And obviously, sort of I mentioned foam along with a number of issues as things that we're looking forward to doing, and the report itself is kind of retrospective. So I will certainly be coming back and reporting.
Brilliant, I think it's really great, and thank you very much again for everything you're doing on this. Thank you.
Thank you for the compliment.
Thank you. In the report, you talk about the 10% per annum linear trajectory to get to which would reach the net zero by 2030. But do you think that is realistic, given that it's going to become more and more difficult to find these carbon savings as we achieve the easier ones?
I think that's why really we've caveated that and said, you know, that it won't be a linear trajectory. I mean, at the moment, the expectation is that over the next year or two, we'll continue to make that sort of level of reduction year on year. And I think as new technologies come on board, or, for example, fire appliances, you know, if sort of readily market available fire appliance that meets our requirements comes onto the market, then obviously that will sort of solve a big issue. But no, absolutely. I think, you know, part of this is about sort of wait and see what comes down the line, because at the moment it is a very ambitious target, along with all of our local authorities, to have set the sort of zero by 2030. But I'm sure we'll get there. Just perhaps not in a linear way.
Okay. Right. If there's no further questions, I'll thank you and your award-winning team. We move on to item 14, is the collaboration and partnership working update. Mandy.
Thank you. I'm Mandy Peskett. I'm a collaboration manager here at Avon. Thank you for inviting me along today. I'm going to provide you with a brief update on our collaboration activities since our last meeting. And I'd ask members to note the content of the report in your papers and see it as evidence that further development in both our collaboration procedures and activities. To provide you with a brief update on the 4 points in the report. So those 4 points are collaboration framework and toolkit, combined scoping impact assessment, which Annabelle has already touched on, collaborations currently in planning, and third-party use of our premises. So to start with the collaboration framework and toolkit, work continues to up the framework and toolkit. If I can just remind members that our collaboration strategy is our first documented approach to collaborative working at Avon Fire. The collaboration framework underpins that strategy and will describe our approach to collaborative working and why we do what we do, the way we do it. And there will also be a further underpinning procedural guidance for collaboration leads so that our collaboration activities are planned, evaluated, closed in a consistent manner across the board. We've tried to introduce as many improvements as possible before publication so that we can ensure we're collaborating professionally and safely. I've liaised with many other FRSs to see how they approach their collaborative working activities, and also groups such as the Institute for Collaborative Working for some best practice ideas that we can implement. So collaboration planning, evaluation and closure processes are being streamlined, including the digitization of forms. So collaboration leads won't have to complete paper forms or emailed forms anymore. It will provide them with better access to collaboration tools so that they can plan their collaboration activities from wherever they are on whatever device. I am introducing some metrics for collaboration, so to ensure that our collaboration activities are kept under review. Evaluations will be conducted annually, and the in-date status of those evaluations will be published on the collaborations register. I'm also going to be publishing on the register an effectiveness rating for our collaboration activities, just a simple red, amber, green rating for how effective each collaboration is at the point of last evaluation. A full report of the framework and toolkit will be provided at next meeting because it will most definitely have been published by then. Moving on to the combined scoping impact assessment, as Annabelle mentioned, This impact assessment is a digital tool that helps us to make informed decisions about the work that we do and ensures compliance with legal requirements such as data protection, Environmental Act, etc. And it helps us to make sure that we consider the people in our communities, our environment, when making key decisions about our collaboration activities. The combined scoping impact assessment is now mandatory as part of the planning process for any collaboration and will be so going forward and will be written into the new framework. Collaboration scoping impact assessments will be reviewed and updated if necessary at every collaboration's evaluation. And all existing collaborations, some of which are long-standing, will have a CSIA completed retrospectively to ensure that they are meeting our risk assessment requirements. Moving on to collaborations and planning, we're currently working with a number of partners on 3 new Memorandum of Understandings to support GESIP principles relating to working at heights, the sharing of live information via our service drones, and multi-agency cross-border exercising. And since writing my report, we're also now looking at the deployment of our fire investigation search dog across our borders and joint working and training with an international disaster responding team. I can provide you with further updates on those activities at the next meeting. A full update on existing collaborations across the entire service will also be included at the next meeting. Moving on to third-party use of our premises, we've begun work, myself and the health and safety team, to improve how we manage our informal collaboration arrangements. And we have a small number of arrangements whereby organisations are provided with access to our premises for their own activities. So we will be placing retrospective documentation in place, and these arrangements will now also be included in our evaluation procedures so that we can make sure that the risk assessments are in place, all of the assessments have been done, etc., etc. So managed along the same lines as our formal collaborations, but just on a less formal scale. That concludes my report for this meeting. Fuller report will take place in January 2023. I'll open up for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. Questions, Paul?
You automatically look at me now, Chair. At the last meeting, I volunteered to act as liaison with Mandy, and just to say that we've now managed to fix a meeting, so apologies for the delay on that. The report you're going to do to the next meeting, will it have a bit more information? You made reference there to the digital tools, so will we be getting some digital information in the next report? Good, thank you. And the other thing, Chair, is Baines is quite tight on office accommodation these days, and I fixed up to see an officer, and he said, we'll go to the fire brigade in Chew Magna because we use their room. And I was really quite shocked because it appeared to be an informal arrangement. So I think it's really good that you're picking up those types of things, because I'm sure things do go on sensibly in the community, and it's quite nice, I think, to record it. So I think that's good. And my final point, Chair, is around, I'm aware that there's a lot of pressure that the WECA are putting on with regards to housing development. And I think one of the key issues that I'm interested in around the planning of collaboration is making sure we engage effectively with planning officers around the size of estates. And we often hear about, the size of roads are getting smaller, parking is getting reduced on estates, and actually getting access around those estates can get really quite difficult for large appliances. And under those circumstances, I'm hoping we can perhaps develop up a few more links with the planners from the local authorities so that we can actually make sure that we don't ignore the fact that you've got refuse carts and fire brigades and ambulances that need to get around those estates.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep, okay. Any other questions or comments? Right, thank you. We'll note that report. And that just leaves the date of the next meeting, which is the 7th of October, 10:30 in this room. Okay? And with that, we'll close the meeting.